these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, folks. We are trying to get back to normal here. I will be pumping out more podcasts for you as long as you give me 5 stars. And today I want to talk about the Colonial Pipeline issue and unpack that a little bit. You've seen a lot of news stories on it. I'm going to use the next 30 minutes to really try and dive down into it and talk about the implications of it. I've also got a distinguished staffer from my DC office on this podcast. He shall not be named, but I assure you he's a lovely gentleman. And he's going to help us through this problem. So, look, let's lay out the basics real quick. On Friday, May 7th, Colonial Pipeline was the victim of a ransomware attack, shut down the pipeline connecting the Gulf Coast refineries and much of the south and eastern portion of the U.S. That's why you see all these gas lines, because people couldn't get gas. Gas couldn't go to the gas stations. It's not just cars that are affected, of course. It's, this has an effect on our military. This has an effect on our national security. Turns out our airplanes also use gasoline. This is an important issue across the board. The attack targeted their IT system, and they shut down the pipeline so that the ostensibly this is what I believe to be true so that the ransomware attack wouldn't proliferate to the operating technology side of things. Okay, just minor detail there. I'm not sure you need to know it, but there you go. As a result, over 5,000 miles of pipeline stopped transportation of 2.5 million barrels a day. So it's a pretty big deal when it comes to U.S. infrastructure. And of course, the Biden administration showed, out of an abundance of compassion that I thought they had, showed no compassion whatsoever to this vital piece of infrastructure, have not offered any help whatsoever. But the Secretary of Energy yesterday did say that, if you only had an electric car, this wouldn't affect you. Well, thanks. That's the Biden administration's message to you, Americans. If you were just better people, if you would just spend all that money on an electric car, on that Tesla, then this wouldn't affect you. So much compassion, so much realism. Anyway, but let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what happened. As of last night, by the way, the looks like the pipeline is back online, so that's great news for a lot of our friends on the East Coast who have been unable to get gas for their cars. So, what we want to talk about is why this happened, why it's important, and what the implications are. Fundamentally, this is an attack on American energy dominance. We're going to talk about where this attack came from and some of the thoughts behind that. And how our geopolitical adversaries, such as Russia, are certainly beneficiaries of an attack like this, and how offshoring energy could lead to more vulnerabilities like this as well. Kevin McCarthy, our distinguished leader in the Republican House, said the Colonial Pipeline crisis shows that we need more American energy to fuel our economy, not less. The Biden administration has already canceled the Keystone Pipeline and paused oil and gas drilling, leaving our energy supply more vulnerable to attacks. This is exactly right. I would also add to this comment that, this is the Biden administration itself is attacking pipelines via excessive regulations, via drawing out permitting deadlines forever and ever and ever. I often point out on this podcast that, look, one of the best ways to reduce global emissions would be to make sure that we build pipelines from our West Texas drilling operations that are flaring natural gas right now. Instead of flaring that natural gas, which just means burning it, put it into a pipeline and export it to places like China and India and replace their coal burning power plants with our cleaner natural gas. This would have a massive effect on global emissions. But the Democrats, they simply do not believe in this type of infrastructure. They're almost gleeful when it goes down. They believe it makes their point for them. Of course, it doesn't. In reality, what you're seeing here is a bit of a glimpse of the Green New Deal. This is what happens when all of a sudden you have a shortage in fossil fuels. And I assure you that every single policy measure by the Democrats is intended to destroy the fossil fuel industry. Abruptly, mind you. Not in a well-reasoned, gradual way, but very abruptly. And so, yes, this is an attack from an outside source, but it's important to note that this kind of attack in a different way is coming from within as well. So let's talk about what a ransomware attack is real quick. And these attacks, they seize data, they encrypt it, and they demand a ransom from the victim to unencrypt the data, usually under the threat of pay, or we're going to release the data or increase the fee. So, 2018, here's some data on this. In 2018, ransomware had an estimated global damage cost of $8 billion. Last year, an estimated 300 million ransomware attacks cost an estimated $20 billion and affected government, corporations, medium and small businesses, and individuals. The primary responsibility for this is a group called the Dark Side. They operate on the dark web, and they basically sell the ransomware software, and they also take a cut of the ransoms. Now, they have not claimed responsibility for this. They claim that they're ethical hackers and that they often give their ransoms to charity. So that's fascinating. As a result of the cyber attack, gasoline prices surpassed $3 per gallon Wednesday for the first time since 2014, in large part due to spiking demand as people race to fill up at the pumps. So the Colonial Pipeline is huge, runs over 5,000 miles from Texas to New Jersey. So it's not surprising that it would have such a large impact. People ask about the Keystone Pipeline. I think it wouldn't have affected this particular issue. Remember, the Colonial Pipeline is responsible for that East Coast supply. The XL pipeline is something different. It transports it back to Texas to be refined. That's what that pipeline would do. I think the main point here is that, look, it's not just outlaw hackers that are against our energy infrastructure. It's also the Biden administration. Going back to the point I made earlier. What do we know about this Dark Side group? We believe they're Eastern European. That belief stems from the fact that they only seem to attack English-speaking Western countries and never Eastern Bloc countries. So, when you're dealing with the Russians and Russian intelligence, very similar to Iran, they like to use surrogates. They're very good at using surrogates, and they give these surrogates wide operational capacity and leeway. They're not as concerned with risk-taking as we would be in our own American intelligence community. And they claim to be apolitical. They operate on the dark web. If you don't know what the dark web is, I'll try and explain that real quick. Basically, it's a you have to download. Maybe I'll let. What do I call you? Because you don't want to be named. Kevin, what do we call? Maybe you can help explain the dark web if you know many more about it. But you have to download a separate Tor browser, I believe, and therefore it enables anonymous browsing, and then you can access this entire other side of the internet. It's very spooky stuff.
Yeah, it's essentially the dark corner. It's the black market of the internet where you don't go there unless you're looking for trouble or ways to get in trouble or cause trouble. I guess that would be kind of a layman's way to put it without getting into the technicalities of it. It's not something you're gonna access with your new MacBook that you just popped open from the Apple Store. It takes some work to get into. You don't just fall into it.
Yeah, it's not hard though. I mean, you got to know what you're doing, but it's a weird place. A lot of illegal activity happens there. That's where people like this live. Maybe people remember. What was the main site on the dark web called that got shut down by the FBI? I can't remember off the top of my head. It was in the news a bunch, but it's not important. Anyway, don't go on the dark web. All right, the FBI might be watching you if you do. That's maybe the moral of the story here. So, it's difficult in these situations, right, to figure out who done it and who to blame. And how we even find that. As of right now, I don't believe that the FBI has come to any conclusions on whether it was somebody associated with Dark Side, whether it was somebody associated with Russia or Russian intelligence, or whether it's just some kid in his basement. I think that's accurate, right?
So there's now confidence that it was Dark Side. Dark Side was suspected, but reporting over the past day or two has pointed directly to Dark Side. But the interesting thing, though, to understand about Dark Side is that it's Dark Side ransomware that was used. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
But
we
how
know that for
DarkSide
sure.
operates- Yeah,
Okay.
yes, sir. But how they operate is they operate as a ransomware as a service. So what they do is they create this software, and then they let clients or let's say contractors use it.
Mm-hmm.
So then a client or a contractor of DarkSide will use that DarkSide software to hack into Colonial Pipeline, let's say. And if they extract a ransom, DarkSide collects a fee for getting to use for that client using their malware. So they're really taking it into a business model as opposed to just hackers creating a code and creating malware and then them being the one who hacks in and inserts it.
And this is it's an ideal situation for, again, like I mentioned before, a country like Russia that is often willing to take a good degree of risk. They're troublemakers fundamentally, and in a way that we in the United States are just not willing to do. And it's hard to attribute because they effectively use these surrogates and then they give them such broad leeway that it's hard to make the connection, right? There's not necessarily that smoking gun that says, "Hey, hacker, we tell you to do this right now, go," right? Because they operate in sort of this freewheeling relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a complete 180 from how the Soviet system worked, right? So a lot of people who study military history, they learn about the one-way radios in Russian tanks during World War II because commands came from the top, and if you were below it, there's no need for you to question, no need to seek clarification. You do what you're told. But now under the new Russian model, the people are allowed much more autonomy, a lot more operational freedom. And it's pretty much go try stuff out and make the motherland proud. So you have you have a lot of these intelligence operations that include cyber warfare, who you have small autonomous groups who have a lot of freedom of action. And you go and you try to make the motherland proud. Sometimes you do, but when you don't, you'll pay a price. So it's kind of a competition for glory and validation in the eyes of the Russian leadership, because if you do well, you'll get elevated, you'll get promoted. But if you bring shame or dishonor or failure, then you'll get punished. So that's what's really interesting about now is you have these small actors with a lot of freedom that make decisions on their own, and that creates that firewall between Russia, the Russian government, the Russian intelligence services, and then these actors. So if we're trying to trace back attribution, it bears the hallmarks, and you look at who benefits most from a huge American energy shutdown on the East Coast.
Yeah. It's our biggest competitor.
Absolutely, because if we look in recent years, the shale revolution, America went from a energy importer to a net exporter. So we cut into someone's market share. Well, whose market share did we cut into?
Right.
Russia. We cut into Russia's market share, and not just does it affect us here in the United States, but now as there's competition of whose energy are we going to use, Russians can kind of tell Western Europeans, look, can you really count on American energy? They can't even take care of their own pipelines. How are they going to supply you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's exactly where this becomes a geopolitical conversation and a geopolitical problem. And it's even more of a problem because we have an administration that it kind of agrees with the Russians. If we're being honest about this, they don't like I've never heard a Democrat exclaim excitement about being energy independent or showing any amount of pride over that. It is it's a real problem. And we're particularly vulnerable in the United States to cyber attacks because we do have such an integrated system and advanced technology, which differs from other countries where maybe more standalone, maybe just less advanced systems, whatever it is. So it might make our systems more efficient, more cost effective. It might make them better in every single way. But there is a vulnerability there, and the investment in cybersecurity infrastructure has not kept pace. Now, under the Trump administration, we did increase funding quite a bit. Really got CISA working on overdrive. That's within the Department of Homeland Security. That's the Critical infrastructure. What's the S stand for?
Yeah, so the Trump administration actually created CISA. So
Yeah.
It's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration or agency. I always get my A's mixed up. But yeah, and that's their primary responsibility is cybersecurity and infrastructure security.
And the fact that we only created that recently is insane. Like, it's insane. But there we are. It needs a lot more work, right? I cut you off. What else were you saying about it?
Oh, no, that was good. That was a good
Yeah.
job.
So we need more of it. Look, I mean, we're just recently we had solar winds. Everybody remembers that story. It compromised U.S. government facilities, DHS, Department of Commerce, Treasury, a number of other public-private clients. In 2013, a New York dam 25 miles north of New York City was hacked. 2018, North Carolina Water Utility Company was targeted. Earlier this year, a Florida water treatment facility was hacked. So they're probing our infrastructure very meticulously. And, maybe they make some money off of this through some kind of ransomware, maybe get paid off. But fundamentally, we should be more concerned that this is a peer competitor, a geopolitical competitor, because it's hard to imagine why a bunch of rogue hackers would bother with this stuff. I mean, look, sometimes they just like to do it just to see if they can do it. There is that culture within the hacking community. Everybody remembers the cool movie Hackers from the 90s, right? But we should be a little bit more suspicious than that, I think. And probably it's fair to attribute some of this to China and Russia and Iran, that both have these capabilities and the desire to do so, to probe our infrastructure. Because they're not going to beat us in a fair fight. They're going to use asymmetric warfare, and cyber attacks along our infrastructure would certainly be considered asymmetric warfare. And it's difficult to respond to as well. The first thing we need to do is to defend against it. Now, it's worth pointing out that one, this instance has shown how much we need pipelines because people have to live their lives, and you need to gas up your car to live your life. It's not just your car either. It's the trucking industry that brings food to your grocery store. Everything goes up in price when something like this happens, and it's not just your gas prices that go up. It's everything you buy goes up. This is and again, I don't want to overly politicize this, but this is the promise of the Green New Deal, people. It really, truly is, because the Green New Deal fundamentally says destroy the fossil fuel industry completely and electrify everything. Okay? Basically, invest in unreliable energy that is dependent on weather. And by the way, they also claim that weather is going to get so much worse under climate change. So it'd be weird to invest in an energy source that it fundamentally depends on weather. Anyway, that's just a side note. But here's the point. In the $2.65 trillion American Jobs Plan, which is the Democrats' trademark infrastructure bill, there's a lot of things that couldn't be considered infrastructure, such as civilian climate corps, whatever that is, or racial equity and environmental justice provisions. But there's nothing in there on cybersecurity. They're not even taking it seriously. When this is probably the greatest need in our country right now. So, you have anything to add to that?
No. So with the American Jobs Plan, it's interesting because they point back to the American highway system and some other things. Great achievements in American history, sure. But they also talk about how the modern need for it. Well, the modern need of so many things, of the actual pieces of this infrastructure that they're talking about funding, need to be secure. They're talking about water treatment facilities. They're talking about electrical grids.
Yeah.
Well, these are things that are very vulnerable. And it's not just ransomware, but far more nefarious actions, like the water treatment facility in Florida from early this year. That wasn't a ransomware attack where they were requesting money. That wasn't they were just going to stop the flow of water. What that hack did is it was going to change the measurements of chemicals that were put into the water and possibly poison people.
Jeez.
So
so this is pretty malicious stuff.
Money.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not just criminal, but there are far more nefarious ways to go about doing it, or to harm the people downstream of this infrastructure.
Yeah. And it gets back to this asymmetric warfare idea, because look, if you can't afford to build 12 new aircraft carriers to compete with the United States, what are you going to do? Hire some 18-year-old hackers, and just tell them to go get wild. That's what you tell them. And it allows you to level the playing field. And go ahead.
Sorry. And not just that, but the genius of using these proxies that make it hard to attribute the attack is if we got word, if the FBI said this was a Russian intelligence operation run in-house to shut down Colonial, all right, we've got an easy way to respond. We do the same thing to them and we shut down one of their pipes, but one of their pipelines. But if they're doing it through a proxy, we cannot for sure determine who it was. DarkSide may have a lot of things, but they don't have a pipeline that we can go and shut down. So how do we respond proportionally?
Yeah, and that's what I want to end with, really, is this sort of philosophical discussion on what escalation dominance looks like in a cyber war. And it's difficult. And we need to figure it out as this administration certainly needs to lay something out, and we need to have a set of, I think, ground rules that indicate, look, this is how we respond based on attribution. If we can attribute it, is it in kind? What if it's like what you said, where their cyber attack actually poisons people and kills people? Well, does that now deserve a kinetic response? Kinetic meaning you're dropping a bomb somewhere. We need to have answers to this as Americans, and there needs to be some kind of structure that we agree upon. Now, of course, every instance is different. There's always a lot of gray area in these things, and it requires decision making ultimately up to the president. And we're all in a bit of a surreal state right now where it doesn't feel like we have a president. It just doesn't. Just based on how he performs on a daily basis. But this is really important stuff, and it's getting worse. And I think there is this feeling abroad from our enemies that America is in a weaker position. America is back to the era of apologizing for everything and empowering our enemies. I think there's maybe changing topics a little bit, but there's a good argument to be made that Hamas is emboldened, that Iran is emboldened, because Biden has long talked about removing those sanctions, long talked about getting back into that deal that was very, very beneficial for the Iranians and their proxies. There's nobody better. Maybe the Russians are a little better, but Russians and Iran are very, very good at surrogate warfare. They're very good at it. I have a direct experience with this on deployments to the Middle East. They're very, very good at it, and they don't take any prisoners. And Hamas obviously receives aid from the Iranian from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the Quds Force. They're very good at this stuff, and they're emboldened in a way that they were not emboldened under Trump. And this is something we just need to recognize as fact, I think.
Well, and if I may, mentioning the Hamas and Iran pieces. So a lot of people were clutching their pearls and wringing their hands after the Soleimani strike. But what they didn't understand, which you made clear, is that we were reestablishing deterrence because there had been an uptick in attacks. What's going on right now in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli strikes on Hamas leadership. Israel's goal is, one, to protect its civilians, of course, but then also to reestablish deterrence. So that's also related to not just of how do we respond to cyber attacks, but how do we create a deterrence?
Yeah, escalation dominance.
Exactly. So that state and non-state actors know, all right, if I mess around with critical U.S. infrastructure, there will be a price to pay that it is not worth it.
Yeah.
And if I do this, I'm going to suffer.
And what infuriates me about this situation is what we've heard from the administration is, well, this wouldn't affect you if you just buy an electric car. I mean, it's such an unbelievably uncompassionate response to people's hardships right now. The response needs to be, we're going to find who did this, and they're going to pay. And we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again, because we're going to finally invest in our critical infrastructure and the cybersecurity needed to defend it. No ifs, ands, or buts there. That should be a very clear message, and it shouldn't be that hard. And it's frustrating that we don't have that right now. Anything left to add?
No, just hopefully this serves as a wake-up call, because we've seen what a small ransomware attack can do, and the effects it can have on so many people. So as we're debating this infrastructure package, it might be very worthwhile to discuss how do we go about securing our cyber vulnerabilities.
Yeah, you would think so. But vague statements about environmental justice and praying to the goddess Gaia are really what's in that in these infrastructure packages. I'm not making that up, by the way. That really is in the Clean Futures Act. All right. Hey, this is why I'm good at what I do, because I have great staff. Hey, thanks for being on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, sir.